Hi everybody, I'm Stuart Smiles. Nice to meet you all. I'd like to talk to you about people networking. So I was looking at it from an information security perspective, and I was looking at breaches and things like that, and I'll give you that presentation in a second. But what I was thinking about is how can you get the message about security out to across an organisation? So what I've tried to do is take a presentation about getting the message across and delivering that message as well. So it might end up as a bit of a DDoS attack, but it's in terms of people. So me, these are the things I like. I like asking questions. I like trying to find answers. I think about thinking, attitude and behaviour and how we change that. Management systems. I used to work for a company where I had an involvement with health and safety as well, and previously did network security. I want to convince people to do the right things for the right reasons. I like something called the 5 whys. I don't know if everyone's heard about it, but the idea that if you ask why 5 times, you get to somewhere near the answer. It might not be 5, it might be 7, it might be 10, but you're going in the direction of why something's happened. I like continuous improvement, and I like using carrots rather than sticks. So I'm trying to get away from what is a good way of convincing somebody to do something, rather than saying, well, fear, 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 you're going to get fined to death. But maybe the answer is to use the fine to death to create a motivation to get better. I'm doing at the moment bits for my master's dissertation. The original one I wrote wasn't academic enough because I'm not very academic in that respect. I tried to find an answer to a question of how much people get fined, and that wasn't academic because it didn't involve too much academic literature. I used to work for a university organisation. I'm looking for a new job, and I'd like people to volunteer to participate in my little research project and contact me. So maybe with interaction we can get people to actually talk within the organisation about security. Maybe through using that interaction on regular occasions, we can get people bought into the idea that maybe I need to give this a little more attention than I previously did. So if I've got the presentation of this is security, this is important, this is how we could do it better, maybe we could have a list of what's important to us and then get some ownership and accountability within the organisation. How many times does the appropriate person need to hear that before they buy into it? And is there a way that we could possibly accelerate the timescale between getting the messages and then getting better and getting to yet? So how do we get to yet better basics or better security aspects to our organisation? How do we get there faster? How do we convert them from maybe not bought in to yes, I'm engaged, or yes, I want to ask these questions of my internal people? So I'm trying to influence that sort of decision. So what I'm thinking, and this is what I'm going to try and do, is if I get the right content here, and I give that content to everybody, and I get them to interact with each other across the organisation, could those people then have influence within the higher up area of the organisation? Could we get more people and more interaction across that organisation so that the person that holds the purse strings decides this is something I want to focus some attention on? Could we draw that time away from other activities towards security? Or make it part of the normal things that they're asking for? Could we make life easy? Because if we make life easy, perhaps that would encourage people to say, you know what, this is something I want to do more of. So why do I need a better network? How do I build it? And what are my objectives? In this particular case, my objective is to answer a question of how do we get organisations to buy into better security? How do we get them to say, oh, this is important to me? So if that's what we're looking to achieve, how can we get there? Well, it's obvious to me that by telling everybody what the message is and getting them all to talk about it, then hopefully that'll get some more mind share. And how by doing that and showing them the tools, then maybe they'll come back with, yes, here we are, we've got somewhere with it. So, can we get better data and better decisions as a result of people actually thinking more about security's my problem rather than it's somebody else's? Oh, we've got a team for that. IT deal with it. And then how could we get better information to the decision maker and then use maybe the case study from this week of BA and Mariott in order to say, well, this is something we previously were taking seriously, I'm sure, but maybe we could do more. Maybe it's now got a heightened impact because of what the likelihood of it being a significant risk to the organisation because the monetary penalties are significantly higher. Maybe it's more impactful. So another thing is, which company are you at now? And would you guess that they're likely to have an impact in the next 12 months? Because then you think, well, okay, if they're going to have an impact in the next 12 months because of a breach, then do I need my action plan for where I'm going to go next? Because the impacts of the breach are so significant that there will be impacts to it, and would they be likely to affect me and that security team? It may be a positive impact in terms of I've got more work to do, I've got this to do, I've got that to do. But where would you go next? Is there a sufficient critical mass of roles in my area? I don't live in London. I'm not in Reading. I'm in the northeast of England. So would that role drop at the relevant time that you want to move? If moving is part of that. And will organisations look at you, you know, if you were the person that was at organisation X and then you move, how is that reputational damage going to affect you? And how would you then take it further forward? So you're going to probably end up carrying some of that on an ongoing basis. So again, it's a question of, well, how do I both isolate myself from an issue, but also protect myself going forward? So who do I know in a local organisation? How do I get more people? Have I got a map? So obviously as a networking person, you're always looking for a network diagram. And ideally a network diagram that's been drawn on with the right information, because the network diagram's always out of date. So, and then how could I get better network to the other organisations within the area? So maybe if I do accountants events, bank events, IT events, and other things within the local area, we can get like traction between other things. Maybe by deploying the payload stuff of what I've got already, we can get a quicker yes to make the organisation where we're at more secure. Maybe the conversation doesn't happen with one particular person. Maybe it happens in different areas at different times. And if we flood the organisation with those messages, both internally and externally to other organisations, those interactions which I have no control over, but they could perhaps persuade people to do things that we want. So, how many times do you think somebody has to hear the message, oh, change your password, it's important, or alternatively, a better password, or use LastPass, or do something differently? How many times would you have to say that before they actually go, oh yes, maybe I will do that? Is there a way that we can achieve getting to that faster? And could we use a DDoS type method in order to get people to that place faster? So if you take that sort of idea of let's get the message to the server, in this case a person, could we get them involved quicker so that their response is better, so that they are more protected? So for example, let's get them using password managers now, because the passwords that they've got are better managed, they're better protected. Could we do that with the spreadsheets and the information that they've got inside their organisation? So one of the things apparently Ryanair said was that Michael O'Leary got sick to the back teeth of people going on about customer service. And whenever he went somewhere, somebody always had a bad story to tell him. And he decided as a result of this that he actually had to change the way in which the customer service was happening in order to stop these interactions. So it's like a toddler and pester power. I've got a daughter who's 3, and she manages to get ice cream when she wants, because she just says, "Daddy, I want ice cream. Daddy, I'm doing this. This is what's happening." Maybe that approach of either repetition or like a single-minded determination to get what you want is the way in which we can change the organisation. And then maybe with the aggregation of marginal gains, as with British Cycling, we can use those those increments in every area to make the organisation significantly more secure. So, with insurance companies, they look at tail data. So they can pretty much accurately work out how much something's going to cost them, and then they can actually forecast it. So could we do the same sort of thing in terms of their claims data? And if we've got that average of how much it's going to cost, then we can actually anticipate what the likely cost is going to be, and then we can forecast what we're going to do about it. With doing the events, Eventbrite, obviously B-sides conferences and things like that, we can get a better network across organisations and then use that network in order to sell the security message. So these are the events that I go to at the moment and where they've been. There will be equivalent events in different areas, and hopefully those things mean that you can interact with other people and get to different organisations and say to them, well, this is something that's interesting. Would you do it? So I'm going to go to the actual thing now. So, what is an information security challenge that you're dealing with at the minute? How and where does the job sit at the moment, and where should it sit? Is there a way that you could actually take that talk, take that issue, and then move it across the organisation to somewhere else? Is there somewhere else that it could be? Who should it sit with, and how do you transfer it? Is there a way to get that moving to the right person? So I did a spreadsheet to assess how much is a breach going to cost, what could be the variables. I used the IBM cost of breaches report, the outcomes from the ICO website, Verizon's data breach investigation reports, and obviously Twitter, because that's got everything up to date and accurate on it. The ICO fines that are there, you can see on the website, obviously, under action we've taken and enforcement. And then we can actually do some forecasting of what the unknown unknowns are. And then we can look at what are the risks that we are currently running and aren't accepted by anyone. because there's a lot of things that people forget about or assume that are being dealt with by somebody else. So I'm using the principle that sunshine is the best disinfectant. So if somebody goes around and says, well, let's have a look at everything, and we've got a sheet that everyone uses, could that be good enough to allow us to say, well, in this area we've done this, in this area we've done this, there you go, happy days, everyone uses the same data. And I know in terms of security, normally everyone would say, well, you know what, it's security, we don't tell anybody about anything because that makes us more secure. But actually what it does is it creates gaps where you expect that one area is doing something when actually they're not, or it's outside of scope for this particular area. So I created a self-assessment checklist based on a number of different things. So maybe we could say, well, these are the assets that are important to us. This is what the investigations say. So Carphone Warehouse said that this, and this are the things that are important. In the report from the ICO. So the best data is probably within those sorts of reports. So it's gathering what they've said and then how what they're looking for, and then can I tick those things off in terms of your feedback loop. If you've got reinstatement or reputation costs, or what we should have done earlier but is now going to be much more expensive because, you know what, we've got to do it now. We've got to buy consultant time. We have to do it through the process that somebody else is doing. So what will make a marked difference to the cost? Valuation of the systems. Obviously, if we look at the things that are important in terms of our systems, we can have a targeted effort on those systems, which increases our impact. If we triangulate for what's significant, then obviously we can say, well, these are the areas where people are attacking, so let's do those first. We can use an accident cost model, basically a spreadsheet, and then how much for each of these different items. And then we can go through the mill and become better at doing the same things time and time again. So I used some of this has come from a document called GPG40. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. It's about information security management systems within the military, and they've got a really good table at the back, Annex A, which says what are these things, and then in terms of maturity level, how do I get from nil to optimized? And then here are the various boxes that you've got, and then how do we achieve movement? So that sort of sets some standards as to what good looks like. This is the table. It's obviously unreadable on here, but you can see the sort of idea of, well, we've got from risk management to everyone knows what's going on and happy days. This is a link that I think is worth using internally. So on YouTube, this is a video from the data protection conference that the ICO did. And it's about the board. I don't know if sound would work on the presentation thing because I haven't tested it. But what she's saying about is accountability in the board. So there's a question came from a guy at Nationwide Building Society. I've got an engaged board. That's great. What would you do if you didn't have that? And another one from HS2 said about, I'm jealous of health and safety legislation because it sets out what the way in which it works. How does that translate through to data protection? So she's got some really good answers that you could then take and use inside your own organisation and put in front of the people, get them together, give them some biscuits, sit in the meeting room and say, I'd like you to have a look at this. And see what you say. Why map the data? Well, obviously, if you look at GDPR fines, everyone had been saying, well, it's 2 to 4% of global turnover. I don't think anyone had really anticipated that when the fines came out this week, they would be as significant as they have been. And now that it's on the radar, perhaps those that reality is going to over a few. Depends on what actually gets paid, but that reality is going to set in. I don't think it's likely that a lot of companies are going to be in a position to pay these fines, so they're going to have to force some sort of defence mechanism of what to do. And how do we expect what it's likely to be? So, in terms of mapping unknowns, maybe from different viewpoints, we could turn around and say, well, you know what, I don't know exactly what it is, but if I look from this viewpoint, I can see it's something like that. If I look from this viewpoint, it's something like that, and that one from there. So then an unknown gets quantified to an extent, and then gives you a ballpark figure, which you can turn around and say, well, you know what, whilst it may not be exact, it still means we've got to do something. Maybe we can triangulate the things on what's important as well. So I started in terms of the cases with a piece of paper and said, well, okay, what are the categories of fines at the moment that are significant, and how do they group together? Put a list together of the various cases and looked at how much was the fine, what was the area of what had happened, what was the issue, who was it, and how much. Now, obviously with GDPR, we know that there's going to be a significant uplift in what the quantum is, but what we can get from this is what the categories are in terms of their appetite for how much we're going to fine you, what we're going to do. And then if we take those, we can translate them across to when we know what the new figures are going to be. So this was for PECA notices, and you can see a grouping here around this level. There's a grouping at this level, and then there's some big ones. So that means that if we look at what they are, you're going to be in a range. So you can anticipate what those ranges might be. So as you anticipate those ranges, you can say, well, okay, what are we going to do about them? So how do we anticipate what the numbers are going to be? So I think, and this was prior to this week, that the maximum was going to be 1.75 million. And that was because, in terms of what the uplift was going to be, it was going to be high. Obviously, Google and Facebook are always going to sit outside of normal, but that's not where we are. That got totally thrown out the window. So they've said BA is 1.5 times the 2017 turnover, and the turnover for Mariott in the UK is 200 million. So this 100 million fine obviously is massive. In terms of global turnover, they were turning over 20 billion. So it's 0.4 times the turnover that's in the accounts that they've published on their website. What I think they're going to do is, if they lawyer up and they do a massive defensive policy on their documentation, they're going to aggressively defend and appeal the cases and knock it down in terms of severity, because there's two benefits. One is obviously it draws out the date at which they have to pay the fine, and the second is that they could actually knock it from a turnover percentage of, say, 1.5 or 1.75 or 2 to maybe 0.5%. And because of the quantums, it's got to be worthwhile to do that. It's got to be. So what I'm anticipating is that they're going to possibly reduce their contractual relationships. So if you were booking via BA.com, maybe they'll have an organisation that holds the data that isn't BA.com. But then obviously you would then say, well, that organisation's the organisation that holds the data. They're the data controller. Go after them, not me as the organisation flying the plane. That seemed to be a response that was happening with health and safety in terms of breaking up organisations into lots of little sections, so that it's like, well, that's where the issue was, not with my bigger organisation. Individuals, I don't know where this is going to go, but at the moment, the fines were probably around £1,000 for an individual. I don't know how that reflects on what's going to happen, because there's a massive imbalance now, before and now, between what is an individual who could cause something going to get compared to what somebody or acting in an organisational capacity going to get or cause you. So that needs to be worked out somewhere and somehow. There's something called sentencing guidance. I don't know if anybody's heard of the term, but inside the Sentencing Council, which is a governmenty organisation that works on behalf of the judiciary, they're now talking about fines in terms of culpability and harm. So if you're highly culpable and highly harmful, then obviously that's top end of the scale. And if you're low culpability and low harm, then that's a low end of the scale. I think that now what they're looking at is something along the lines of a turnover percentage. So if you turn around and say, well, I've done everything that I possibly could, and the outcome was going to be low anyway, then maybe I want to be at the bottom of the scale, pretty pleased with a cherry on top, rather than very high outcome, very high harm. And I think that's probably where the arguments are going to end up in terms of what we're going to do about these issues. In terms of the guidance, when you map the various when you map from any case or issue, there's sort of boundary as to what the likely outcomes could be. So if whatever the offence is, there's like a standard one. A low grade version is probably about 0.4 times the standard. It might, and a high end one is 1.75 times whatever that standard is. Otherwise, you're not looking at whatever this offence might be. So the question is how you target what your actual problem is, and then how you argue and discuss, but obviously prepare in advance of obviously having a breach and investigation to make sure that you're not going to be in this bottom category. This is what Mariott had to say in their latest report. Directors do not anticipate any significant changes to the company's business in the near future. The board is responsible for the company's system of internal control and risk management and reviewing its effectiveness. Everything's disclosed in the ultimate parent company's financial statements, which aren't part of the report. So given that breaches are happening daily, and we know all of these are happening and are going to continue to happen, then we need to have some sort of mitigation strategy on it. So what are the elements that are probably likely to reduce risk? These have come from Verizon's data breach investigation report. So senior management sponsorship, you have to have buy-in. We do have a list for that. So obviously if you have a list and you manage things, it's more likely that when you've checked things that the backups work. If you don't check them, then they probably don't. if you've tested that it fell over last time and this is what we did and we know who's done that and how that works, then it's more likely to be able to be recovered faster. Having a schedule and a planner. So in the a translation of PONMON and the data breach investigation report looked at, well, how much is the PONMON figure? What are the things that make a significant difference to each incident in terms of reducing the cost? And what makes a difference in terms of increasing the cost? Can we take those reductions and make those happen? Can we increase things or reduce the things that make it expensive? So, could we remove the number of records? If we chop the number of records available from, 10 years to 6 months or 3 months or something like that, that's obviously a massive amount of reduction in terms of how much the cost would be. And we can justify the numbers and know our systems. So this is a little spreadsheet that I put together. And what you can see is if we've got a certain number of records in a database, we can turn around and say, well, as a guesstimate, which is based on these estimates and figures, we can say, well, how many records, how much are we looking at? And this is just for the breach in terms of what are the various costs associated with it. And what does POMON say? And then how do we adjust it for us? For an accident cost, we can take that same methodology and we can say, well, okay, if we look at what are the elements that we have to deal with, how many people do we need? How much are we paying them? And what's that line item going to bring out? And then we can have them at different levels. So 150 quid an hour or a day. I don't know what the rates would be. 500, 2,000. And then extra expenses. Put them all together and then get a figure. But at least you've turned around and said, I've put some sort of figures which I can say justifiably would make sense into my calculator. And this is what we're looking at. So it's no longer a case of stick a finger in the air job. It's a better finger in the air job and it's better estimation. And then you can summarise it so that people know what the things are there. So what can we do now? We can agree what systems are valued at. We can show our workings. We can give time and attention to what's important. We can get the idea of finance bought into what makes a difference. And they can show the money in terms of, well, unless I know what the impact is going to be, why would I spend the money? You've got the impacts, you've got the money, you can value it. What could a risk planner look like? So this is a spreadsheet based on transport management, but that doesn't really matter. The important thing is, well, have we got information about how we get in, who the owners are, how much of a problem is it when it hits the fan? We could have cost of the application or maybe some sort of maintenance fees, so that we say, well, what are we prioritising here? Who are we going to call for Ghostbusters when we need them? How do we get them? Are they on a retainer? Have we got the phone number to hand? Is everything there? Once everything's there, obviously it makes it a lot easier. And then, when have we last checked the system? So if we can demonstrate that we checked the system 3 weeks ago, then and we've got a schedule to do it, is that going to help in evidencing that we've got a managed, organised system? We're using appropriate technical and organisational measures. And as you've got a way of showing it that everyone uses, then you can distribute the responsibilities for the various systems and the various things that are going on. And then you can also show accountability, ownership, and then show the maintenance. And then obviously you can use pretty colours because that allows you to either distribute, well, these events are happening here, but these events are happening in different occasions, or there's a pen test at this point, there's a system update on this date, there's a weekly patching schedule for Microsoft on a regular basis. So what I wanted to do, and there's probably not enough people at the moment, but I was going to say, well, who's going to be the board? Who would want to be on the board? And then say, let's take some questions that we've got about security, and then how do we put them around the organisation and say to them, well, maybe this is an issue that needs to be addressed not just by IT but by other areas of the business as well. So what roles do you think, or what issues need to be looked at and addressed? What could be sorted out? And then if you look from the perspective of either the critical security control or OWASP assessment, and look at your organisation, then you can use OWASP, NIST, Cyber Essentials, the Essential 8 from the Australian National Signals people, and then say, is it not on the radar, or we've got everything and we're happy days with it? Then you can say, well, where should we focus our attention? And we've got a threat map internally for what's important. Have you all seen the NCSC board toolkit? You heard about it? Anybody? There's a lot of people shaking their heads. Yes? No? So they ask a question of what does good look like. They look at what is the things that the technical team and the board could have a conversation about. As a board, do we assure ourselves that our organisation's cybersecurity measures are effective? Have we got it integrated with cyber risk and business risk? What's our plan to develop our current profile? Have they got the right expertise for making the right decisions? So if these sort of things and this content's available, how does it get inside the organisation further from an IT team perspective and an IT problem to everybody within the senior management structure, and then get them coming back saying, I want you to satisfy these criteria, please? Because as they do that, you can turn around and say, well, okay, we've got the criteria, we know what's going on, we can do something about this. The next ones they've got are, do we have a clear understanding of technical systems, processes, assets, and how they're contributing to achieving our objectives? So if it's old and we're not using it, can we turn it off? Is there a way that we can agree that that's what we're going to do? Do we identify, keep and track of systems, data and services that we're responsible for? So these questions that are going to the board, hopefully, they'll come back to the IT team and say, how am I going to answer this? So let's take the opportunity of feeding the questions in, and then being able to get the conversation going on. Here's the response, and what we're going to do about it is obviously going to be the next question. Have we got a process for cyber risk and business risk integration? Do we have effective and appropriate approach to managing cyber risks? How they're escalated? What's the threshold for board involvement? as a board, have we clearly set out what types of risks we would be willing to take and those which are unacceptable? Because obviously that what we view as being acceptable to us might not be the same view as what's acceptable elsewhere. So it may be acceptable that there's a product that we use that's old, but you know what, people can update it or buy a new one. Or maybe we need to turn around and say, you know what, it's not going to be used anymore. We've got to get rid of it. Or this box that we have used for X amount of time, we now have to migrate the people that are still using it to the new system. Maybe we need to turn it off. Extra things I wanted to mention. Cyber Girls First. I don't know if anyone has heard of it, but it's a program that I was told to about at ISARCA, and it's aimed at 11 to 16 year olds. And the idea being that before they get into GCSEs and things like that, they keep doing maths. The person I met, she's about 80, and she's running it from her room, but she's got JP Morgan, Microsoft, Oracle, that sort of thing, all of them engaged, happy days. The people that have been doing the course have gone to either Cambridge to study computer science, or they've been to Downing Street as a result. I think companies are starting to look away from London. Obviously, Manchester is booming as an IT type area. I live in the northeast. I think it'd be nice to see that some of that sort of thing is happening again. I think, again, developer talent. I don't know who works in a developer-y environment, but it seems that people are poaching developers, so that's going to be a risk that needs to be highlighted, that those people are going to be attracted away. And lastly, at B-Sides in Liverpool, Peter Blexley was talking about his campaign to try and find someone, which was interesting because what he's trying to do is find someone through social media. So I said to him previously that whenever I did a talk, I'd mention it. But on his Twitter feed, you can see what he's doing. But he thinks that he can find someone through networking on social media, because at some point someone will recognise the person or take a picture of the person or whatever. So those were the things I wanted to talk about. In summary, elements which reduce risk. It's obviously important to agree what's high value. Using a list and sharing that list and having that sunshine on it allows you to turn around and say, well, what are we doing about this thing over here? A schedule and a planner obviously allows you to say, well, let's look at these things on our time frame rather than on a Friday afternoon when no one's here and we don't want to do it because we don't even know who that person is that used to run that system that's now left. So you're learning at your timing on your schedule rather than on someone else's. And I truly believe that sunshine is the best disinfectant. Oh, that's what I could saw reading. So British Airways is fine. they're saying the notice of intent is the first stage of the filing process. They take lots of things into account when setting a proposed fine, including the type of data, the number of people affected, and the seriousness of the incident. So if those are what they've said to me, then that's what they're saying to you as well. This is what Mariott said in their latest report that's from Mariott Inc. The issues that they've got at the moment, they're talking about numerous class action lawsuits, foreign government authorities, I think that means the ICO, material, remedial and other expenses, which may not be covered in insurance, including fines. And then next page is undertakings. So they're going to get undertakings. They're going to have to materially increase our data security costs or otherwise require us to alter how we operate our business. Payment card networks may seek to attribute losses and other expenses. Significant management time and company resources have been and may continue to be devoted to the data security incident. Insurance may not be sufficient or available to cover all of our expenses. And the relevant insurance cover may not be available in the future on commercially reasonable terms or at all. To date, they say that in terms of booking, they've not seen a meaningful impact on demand. So the demand's going to be fine, but obviously the cost isn't. They don't believe this incident will impact our long-term financial health. Expect to incur significant expenses, legal proceedings, regulatory investigations, expenses and capital investments, compliance activities, and increased legal and regulatory requirements. So if you take these slides, which will be available in post, then maybe by getting that information into the relevant people and then across the organisation, then should there be an impact, is there a way of getting that impact across the organisation? Because that's the impacts that other people are saying, and they hadn't been told what the fine was, but that's what they forecast and that's what they're concerned about. So allow it to be used as a way of presenting that let's not have that happen to us. Thank you very much.